Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I made a podcast. And you're listening to PTCG Radio, the podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game. Running straight into the news this week, we have news from BW7 in Japan. This is a set that's going to be called Plasma Gale, and it's coming out on October the 19th. Now, for us, and this is just my working out based on looking through Japanese sets and what's likely to be coming to us, this is probably going to be in our May set, which will be coming out just in time for Nationals next year. So it's not something we need to worry about for a while yet, but it is quite interesting. The interesting thing is, an image has been released showing a Klinklang. Now, Klinklang, although it did recently win US Nats, it's not an inherently interesting Pokemon, at least not in my opinion. But what's very interesting about this Klinklang is, underneath his HP, it says Team Plasma's Pokemon, which means it looks like we're going back to owner's Pokemon. Now, if you go way back to the beginning of the TCG with the Gym Hero sets, you had Misty's Pokemon and Brock's Pokemon and Blaine's Pokemon, and you would have trainers which specifically helped those Pokemon. There'd be trainers that helped Misty's Pokemon, and trainers that helped Blaine's Pokemon. But other than that, the Pokemon were essentially as you would expect. Fast forwarding to Platinum and onwards, Diamond and Pearl sets, we had SP Pokemon, and these really dominated the format for quite some time, only just being rotated before Nationals last year. And these were Pokemon that, regardless of what they should be, were all basics. And they had certain cards like Poker Turn, which allowed you to pick one up, like a Super Scoop Up without a flip. Energy Gain, which was a tool which provided one colourless energy, essentially allowing 2 energy attachments per turn. And Power Spray, which was a devastating card, which you could actually use to stop opponents using Pokemon powers, provided you had 3 SP Pokemon out on the field. Some people thought these SP Pokemon made the game incredibly skill intensive, some people thought they were broken and slightly unfair. Regardless, we are not going back to an SP style mechanic, and the reason I can say that for certain is that Klinklang is a Stage 2. Now at this stage that really is all we know. We know that Klinklang's coming out, we know he's a Team Plasma Pokemon, we know he's a Stage 2. No information has yet been released about what mechanics may support this, or whether it is just a gimmick, although looking at the history of the PTCG, it's unlikely to just be a gimmick. Regardless, it's going to be fairly fun finding out. Secondly, with the news, I would just like to give a quick shout out to Curtis Leon, who won Canadian Nationals with Entei Mewtwo Terrakion. Now, I did mention this last week, but I forgot to name the poor gentleman, and as he went through the process of winning the entire Nationals, I think it's worth giving him a quick shout out. Well done, Curtis. And finally, for the news, I had a question from Stephen Fitchner, sorry if that's a mispronunciation of your name, to my email asking about the road to Nationals and Worlds and how the season actually works. That was going to be the focus of today's podcast, but unfortunately something more important has come up. So thank you for your email, Stephen. We will be getting to that next week. We do, however, know how many championship points you need to qualify for Worlds. In Europe, the cut-off was 40. Now, it was possible to make Worlds with 39, and there are people that did. But a friend of mine, Jamal Cameron, managed to get 39 championship points and unfortunately come 52nd, missing out on ELO. So 39 was not a guarantee, so I'm counting 40 as a cut-off there. Similarly, in the US, there were a couple people that made it in with 49 championship points, but really 50 was the cut-off. Now, we are led to believe that the championship points you gain from Worlds will count towards next season's total, giving you a quick heads up on the competition that didn't go to Worlds and do well. So that does mean that number 1 in the world on championship points for this season is my good friend Tommy Roberts. Well done, Tommy. You done good, boy. Now, to the main part of the podcast today. It was all going to be about championship points and the road to Worlds and Nationals, but I woke up this morning to find that the entire Black and White 6 set from Japan, this is Freeze Bolt and Cold Flare, due to be released in 2 days' time on July the 13th, the entire set has been leaked onto the interweb with scans and translations. Now this is likely to be, and again this is my own guess based on the previous transitions between Japanese sets and English sets, and also looking at what we've had and what is coming up. It's looking to be coming to us in February, which is after our City Championships. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go through any interesting Pokemon I've seen in the set. I'm going to give you a rundown of all the 6 EXs, and then I'm going to have a quick look at trainers. Now obviously with these being leaked this morning, there may be one or two things that I've missed or not quite thought of. There may be a couple inaccuracies in the translation. But with me doing the podcast today and the scans being leaked today, it was a little bit too perfect. So my apologies if there's anything that is slightly wrong. I will correct myself in future if that's the case. So starting off we have Vileplume. Now I mentioned him last week, not much to talk about. He gives 4 times weakness to all of your opponent's Pokemon. Blastoise is making a comeback. Now, we all knew he was making a comeback because Squirtle had already been leaked. What's interesting is that he's got the Rain Dance Poke Power, and what that means is you can put as many water energy into play during your turn as you like. Now, according to the current translation, this is more like Emboar than it is for Alligator, in that you can put it onto any Pokemon, not just a water Pokemon. Now, nobody really played for Alligator, so you got to question whether Blastoise is going to be played. I think he stands more of a chance because we don't have so many catcher with Junkarm being rotated, so he's less likely to be taken off the bench. We've also got Squirtle with the ability which acts as a bench shield, if anyone remembers that, whereby Squirtle cannot be hurt if he's on the bench, which is nice. It means you've got a bit more time to hopefully get him into play. We've also got a Scizor who's got a very interesting attack that for a double colourless energy does 40 and means that Pokemon does not take any damage from EXs in the following turn. However, by the time this comes out, we're going to have a Sigilyph with a body that protects it from EXs all the time. So, we're going to wager that if you want an anti-EX tech, that's going to be slightly better. Plus, Scizor is a stage 1. We also have Swoobat, who could be the new Durant. It's got a very interesting attack. For 1 Psychic Energy, it's got an attack which discards cards from your opponent's deck equal to the amount of Psychic Energy attached to Swoobat. Now, Swoobat is a stage 1, not a basic, so that does make it slightly worse than Durant. But it can benefit from Gardevoir. If you can get a Gardevoir on the bench, then that 1 Psychic Energy becomes 2, 2 becomes 4. If you can manage to stop your opponent setting up using things like Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer, maybe the trainer that's coming out which gets rid of all the tools, or 2 of your opponent's tools, if you can stop them setting up and attach 3, 4 energy with Gardevoir on the bench, that becomes 6, 8 energy. You could be discarding 8 cards from their deck per turn. Now this is going to be a lot harder to set up than Durant for Durant energy, but if you can get this working consistently, you have got a hell of a deck on your hands. We all saw how good Durant was. Swoobat, if you can make it consistent, is better. We have a Toxicroak, which is a very interesting attack for 1 colourless energy that does 20 damage. 20 damage isn't good. But if one of your Pokemon was KO'd last turn, it does 90 damage. And it's a Psychic type. Now, for those of you paying attention, Mewtwo's HP is 170, which is less than 90 times 2. Toxicroak, stage 1, single colourless energy, potentially a splashable Mewtwo tech. Unfortunately, Mewtwo is less relevant now than he used to be, and by the time this set comes out, he's likely to be not the unstoppable force he once was. He'll still be good, he'll still be played, but he's not likely to be the be-all and end-all. Whether you want to give 2 spaces to a 1-1 tech line, I'll leave that one up to you. Now, a potentially very interesting Pokemon is Ditto. Now, Ditto has an ability whereby you can take a basic Pokemon from your hand and put it onto Ditto, and then Ditto becomes that Pokemon with HP and attacks, etc. Now that to me seems a little bit pointless. It gives you a slight surprise element in a what's that Ditto going to turn into kind of way, but it doesn't really give you an inherent advantage. Now there are 2 possibilities for Ditto, and we are going to need rulings on this because they're things that I cannot say definitively one way or the other. Firstly, there is apparently an old ruling on an old card whereby you could have a Ditto, or of something like this, pop the stage 1 down and immediately rare candy it to a stage 2. The reason being, if you put Ditto down and then next turn turn it into, say, a Squirtle, rare candy, Blastoise, that has already been in play for 1 turn. Obviously you can't put a Squirtle down and rare candy to a Blastoise in today's format, they've errated rare candy. But if Ditto counts as having been in play for a turn still when you pop Squirtle on, he could be a very, very interesting tech for stage 2s. Could also be a good tech for stage 1s. Think about your 30 and 40 HP Dynamos that are a little bit fragile. Start with a 70 HP Ditto, then in your second turn, whack down a Dynamo and then stick an Eel on top of him, and you don't have to have that 30 or 40 HP Dynamo sitting there for a turn. But I don't know that this is going to be the ruling yet. Secondly, the question is, when Ditto becomes an EX, does it still benefit from the EX rule? Now, my inkling is that he would. He's getting the attacks, he's getting the HP. A couple people on the forums out there are mooting about the idea that maybe he doesn't take the EX rule. And if he doesn't, we've got something very, very interesting there. Now, Round is a deck which has been getting a little bit of play here and there. UK player Tom Hall, who I mentioned last week as having qualified for Worlds, he did take a Battle Road with a Round deck. However, he did admit to me himself that it was a Battle Road where he played Round because he thought that it was a less competitive Battle Road that he could pull out a victory with it. Now, Round is basically a few Pokemon such as Palpitoad, Seismitoad and Wigglytuff, whose attacks do 20 or 30 damage times the amount of Pokemon on your field that have the Round attack. So if you get Seismitoad out with 6 Pokemon with Round, it does 180 damage, and that's pretty darn good. Explode takes things to the next level. For 4 colourless energy, now there is more than a double colourless that Wigglytuff and Seismitoad take, it does 50 times the amount of Pokemon with Round. If you can get 4 Pokemon with Round out, and 4 energy on your Explode, you will one-hit KO any EX, even if they have Eviolite attached. And that is absolutely fantastic. It is a stage 2, it does need 4 energy, and you will need stage 1s or 2s on your bench to back him up. But potentially, Round could be taken off in a big bad way. He's got a quite funky primary attack as well, in that for 3 colourless energy you can look at your opponent's hand and discard all the items. That's kind of fun if you don't have 4 energy, but this boy's all about the Round. Galvin Chola is potentially interesting. He does an attack whereby you discard all lightning energy attached, and it does 30 times the amount of lightning energy you discard. So the theory is, you put a bunch of eels out, you attach energy to Galvin Chola, and then you discard it to do lots of damage. It's not good enough. There's no shame in here, so you cannot pop a bunch of energy on him and do a massive attack. You've got to either attach it, or you've got to put it on with eels, or, I suppose, play a lot of energy switch. Galvin Chola has 80 HP. His pre-evolution Joltik has 40 HP. Cute as you like, but he has 40 HP. It's not going to stay around long enough to do any damage. In theory, you can get 6 energy on it, discard them all, and one-hit KO an EX. But you're not going to get 6 energy on him before he gets killed. There is a Glysaur with an attack that does 20, plus poison, and stops them retreating for just a fighting energy, which is potentially good. And there is a Scolipede line, where they all, from the basic through to stage 1 through to stage 2, have a poison point Pokebody. And what this does is, if they're touched by an attack, even if they're knocked out, the attacking Pokemon becomes poisoned. Unfortunately, the attacks are terrible. The best attack in the line, Scolipede's attack, for a Psychic, Colourless, and a Colourless, it does 120 if they're poisoned. Less than that if they're not. It's just not good enough. There's a really funky Aldino card that you actually play from your hand, which removes a damage counter and any special conditions, which would be quite good against something like Vanillux, but without Trainer Lock in the form of Vileplume. Vanillux isn't going to be the force it was this season, and let's face it, it wasn't much of a force this season. But it is more searchable than Trainer cards and Healing cards, so maybe there is a niche, although I don't see it. There is also a Dusknoir coming out. And carrying on the trend of so many non-EX Pokemon at the moment, the attack is terrible. But it has a very, very nice ability, which basically lets you manipulate the damage counters on your opponent's side of the field. Move them around as you like. So get a spreader out, someone like Kyurem for example, and then you get a Dusknoir on your bench, and you can move all the energy to knock out whatever you want. This is good. And there were people last season, or this season we're just finishing up, who actually teched in Darkrai Cresselia Legends so they could do that as an attack. But you still run into the problem that it's a stage 2 Pokemon that you're putting on your bench to support you, and that's not all that great. Now I am going to mention Charizard here, but unfortunately it's not that great. We all love Charizard, the kids love Charizard. But Charizard's no good. For a Fire and 2 Colourless, it does 40 damage to the active, and to another Pokemon. And for a fire and 3 colourless, it does 150, and you discard a fire. Well, I said a fire and 3 colourless, that should be a fire and 4 colourless. Which is just absolutely absurd. 3 energy attachments minimum, and that's if you get the double colourless on there. Twice. And it's a stage 2. And the other thing, and this is going to be a bit of a theme when we hit the EXs in a minute, 150 damage isn't great, because it more than knocks out anything else, but it doesn't knock out EXs. But generally the good ones have 170 or 180 HP. So 150, unless you can stack plus powers, and without Junk Arm that's going to be difficult, then actually 150 damage isn't really any better than 120. It does allow for occasional one-hit KOs on things like Hydrangea, for example, and other stage 2s, but generally I don't see 150 as a particularly good number at the moment. Another card I am liking the look of, although a lot of people don't agree with me, is Lunatone, which has a very simple ability. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put them back in any order you like. That has huge potential. If you are really struggling, getting that supporter 1 turn earlier is a huge advantage, and that's what Lunatone can do for you. A couple more which I think are worth talking about. One of them is Raticate, which is not a Pokemon we talk about very often because generally the cards are terrible. But he's got a really interesting attack, which for 3 colourless energy takes the opponent's HP down to 10. So it'll be knocked out by anything next turn. They can have an Eviolited Mewtwo with 190 HP. Stick up Raticate, 3 energy, and they are down to 1. Which in theory is good, but then you run the problem of what happens if they heal it. Well, there are a couple of things you can do about that. One of them is the new Flygon, which has an ability whereby it does 10 damage to opposing Pokemon between turns. So in theory, if they don't heal, they kill your Raticate. You stick up Flygon, they die, but they could heal before that happens. There's also the Amoonguss from Next Destinies, whereby when you evolve it, the defending Pokemon becomes both poisoned and confused. Stick Amoonguss down, they become poisoned, attack with Raticate, and they will die by poison between turns. Potentially very interesting, but it's let down by the fact that Rattata has 30 HP, Raticate has 60 HP. If your opponent plays Darkrai, as soon as they get a Darkrai out, you can't bench a Raticate. A Rattata, sorry, because as soon as you do, it's going to be killed by Darkrai. It's an interesting card, but I fear it's destined for League status at best. Now, Flygon also has a semi-interesting attack, in that for a Grass, a Fighting, and 2 colourless, it does 80 damage, and if you discard the Grass and the Fighting, it paralyses them. But it's going to be hard to cycle that paralysis turn after turn, and 80 damage for 4 energy really isn't spectacular. But all you Flygon fanboys, you're getting a new Flygon. Now the last non-EX Pokemon I want to talk about is Stoutland, and he is my pick for the dark horse of the set, possibly even the best non-EX Pokemon in the set. Now what he does is, for 3 colourless energy, he does 90, and if you flip tails, you do 20 damage to yourself. The attack is fine, but on a stage 2 it's fairly underwhelming. What is awesome about Stoutland is its ability, whereby if Stoutland is active, your opponent can't play any supporters. And I've had plenty of games recently, and I'm sure most of you have as well, where either you or your opponent hasn't drawn a supporter, and the cards you've got in your hand and the cards that you're top decking aren't enough to keep you going. This is a format in which you need a stream of supporters, or else you're not going to really get anywhere. And that's what Stoutland can do, stop your opponent playing those supporters. Now it is unfortunately when Stoutland is active, he can be captured around, but if you could get 2-3 Stoutland out, you could stop your opponent playing supporters, you could stop them setting up, and you could have a very easy games. I'm not saying it's going to be easy to make a good deck with Stoutland because of the problem of it having to be active, but I think it is certainly possible. And with no Junk Arm next year, I know this is something I keep going back to, but I cannot overestimate and overstate how big an impact the lack of Junk Arm is going to have. Without having those Junk Arms, your opponent is not going to have so many catches as they used to. And that brings us to the EXs. And there are 6 of them in this set, and I think they're maybe slightly weaker than previous sets. Starting off, we've got Cresselia, a Psychic Pokemon with 170 HP who's weak to Psychic, with a pathetic attack that for Psychic, Colourless, does 90, and the following turn will have no weakness. But that takes so much energy that you're going to have to be building that up on the bench. Mewtwo DCE Catcher says hello. It's pointless. Now, when it was originally leaked, it seemed to have Nidoqueen's Pokebody from back in the day, whereby you could heal 10 damage from each of your Pokemon between turns, and it appeared stackable, so you could be healing 40 damage between turns, or, to put it another way, 40 from everything after your turn, 40 from everything after their turn. That seemed too good to be true, and of course it was. It heals 10 damage from itself between turns. Cresselia is bad. Now, I know we've said this about things like Kyogre and Kyurem, and they found uses. I'm calling it now. Cresselia, terrible. Landrieu Cx is a water Pokemon EX. It has 170 HP and a weakness to grass. It's got a funky little ability that allows him to effectively tag in whenever. You can make him active whenever you want without a switch or retreating or anything like that. The attack for free Colourless does 50 damage, but it adds 20 damage for each water, which could very quickly stack up if you got, for instance, Blastoise out on the field. Possibly taking a bit too much setup, but with less catcher, no Junkon, we could be seeing a format where these kind of things are possible next year. Celebi EX has a pretty bad attack that for grass Colourless does 60, and then you can pop him to the bench to hide him, but without regular Celebi Prime if you will, and a lack of energy acceleration, I don't think he's going to be fast enough. Not only that, we've got plenty of Pokemon like Ferrothorn that goes to the bench and they're not seeing play. Theoretically, you could pop him to the back and hide him behind a Gothitelle, but I still don't think it's all that great. It does have an ability that lets you use pre-evolutions, so your Stage 2 can use the attack from your Stage 1, your Stage 1 can use the attack from your basic. But it's such a basic heavy format, we don't really need that. And when we have the Stage 2s, like Hydragen's going to see some play and Empoleon's going to see some play, we generally like the attacks from them. But the biggest reason why no one's going to play Celebi, it's got 110 HP and gives up 2 prizes. Now, a lot of people don't play Shaymin EX due to the fear of starting with it and having 2 free prizes sitting on the board whenever your opponent wants to catch them up. I don't think people are going to play Celebi for that reason. White Kyurem and Black Kyurem, they've both got 180 HP, they're both Dragon types, they're both weak to Dragon type. They're just bad. They've both got a little attack for 60 damage and a big attack for 150. But the 150 attacks have drawbacks, and as I said before, I don't rate 150 as a particularly good amount of damage at the moment. I don't think they're going to be much good. Now finally, we've got Landrieu Cx, and this is the one EX in a set I love the look of. Fantastic turn 1 attack, 1 fighting energy, 30 to the active, 30 to 1 on the bench. Now it's looking like Pokemon like Hydragen are going to see a lot of play next season. 30 times 2 is 60, Landrieu does 30, Dino, the basic from Hydragen, has 60 HP. That means you're going to be able to get some nice turn 1 kills off. It's going to be a nice counter for if that deck starts getting out of control. It's also got a big attack for 2 fighting and a colourless that does 80, or if you discard those 2 fighting, 150, which could be a brilliant Darkrai killer if you need those prizes. I think Landrieu Cx could be fantastic, especially if it's paired with the next level of Terrakion decks that we're seeing next season. Now this brings me to my ending point about AXs. It seems like Pokemon are just doing what they want. We've seen Raikou and Entei, we haven't seen Suicune. They're not seeming to complete all of these sets. They just doing what they want, and that's fine. But don't be betting on which EXs are going to come out based on which ones have already come out. You're likely to be disappointed. And also, they have laid out their stall, Pokemon have. We're getting basic EXs, we're getting legendary EXs, and there's a bunch of legendaries we haven't seen yet. By the time we run out of legendaries, we're probably going to be on a new mechanic, in the same way we went from level X to Prime and Legends, and then from Prime and Legends to EX Pokemon. I don't think we're going to see any Stage 1 or Stage 2 EXs. And I don't think that's a terrible thing. It's kind of cool having the EXs being the legendaries from the game. Now going on to trainers, there are some good, there are some bad. First off, we've got a supporter called Hugh, which forces both you and your opponent to either draw or discard cards until you've got 5 in your hand. Now this is potentially absolutely stunning. If you've got an empty hand and your opponent's got a hand of 9, you get to draw 5, they have to discard 4. The problem is, a lot of the time nowadays, we want a supporter to try and get us going. And if we've got 4, 5, 6 cards in hand, we're not really going to want to draw Hugh. We're going to want an N or a Juniper or something like that. Potentially amazing, but too situational, I think, to be an absolute must-have. We've got Escape Rope, which I mentioned before, is a reprint of Warp Point. We have Town Map, which means that you get to play with your prizes showing. This is quite good, but it does give an advantage to your opponent because they can see what's prized. If they see that you've got a capture prize, they know that you've got a maximum of 3 in your deck. It gives them a little bit of knowledge. It also means they can possibly stave off an attack for a turn if they can see that doing so would net you a really important prize. The other thing to mention here is we had Aoife Lithograph last season, or this season we're just finishing up, which let you look at your prizes and obviously you could write them down and your opponent didn't see. And nobody played it, except in Durant occasionally, so I don't see how that will change with Town Map. We've got Aspersia City Gym where all Pokemon have plus 20 HP. I don't really see the point, it seems a bit rubbish to me. I suppose it's occasionally situational when you really need that extra HP, but it's helping your opponent as much as you. The much more interesting stadium is Verbank City Gym, which adds 20 damage to poison between turns, so 10 becomes 30. It's just such a shame this had to come in as Crobat's being rotated, because that would mean Crobat was poisoning doing 60 between turns, which would be absolutely mental. Sorry Crobat. Just not happening. It does, however, work well with Amoonguss, who I mentioned earlier. You evolve to Amoonguss, it poisons, 30 between turns. We've got Skylar, not Shayla, as I incorrectly stated a couple of weeks ago, which allows you to search for one trainer, but let's face it, a trainer can mean anything. Get an energy search, you get an energy. Get a heavy ball or a level ball, and you can go and get pretty much whatever Pokemon you want, etc. Aoife is a very interesting card, which allows you to reveal the top card of your deck, and if it's an energy, attach it to one of your Pokemon. We actually are getting, in trainer form, a universal form of energy acceleration. And this is why I like Lunatone so much. You've got 4 Aoife, you've got no Junkam, I told you it was going to keep coming up. You need to make it count. Use Lunatone, have a look. If it's worth it, play Aoife. You can be going much more quickly. I think Aoife and Lunatone are a fantastic combination. We also have a draw trainer. Victory Medal is about to be rotated, and there are officially no draw trainers in the format. We're getting Bicycle, which is kind of like Bianca's little brother. It allows you to draw until you have 4 cards in your hand. Now, this is very situational, but if you've got a hand of 0 or a hand of 1, Bicycle is amazing. If you get end to 1 card, and that card is Bicycle, all of a sudden that end becomes 4 cards, and that, my friends, could be absolutely fantastic. Finally, we have the Ace Spec Cars. Now, I've already talked about the ones that are specific to Black and White Kyurem, and I did ask the question, are they always going to be tools? Are they always going to be specific to Pokemon? And we've got our answers, and the answer to both is no. There are 2 coming along. One allows you to heal 90 damage, which is alright, but nothing spectacular. The other one is Computer Search, and this is spectacular. Discard 2 cards from your hand, grab any card from your deck, and that is just amazing. You're only allowed 1 Ace Spec card in your deck. I think for anyone that doesn't specifically need a particular Ace Spec card to make their deck work, I think Computer Search is going to be like Ultra Ball, not Ultra Ball, Luxury Ball was back in the day, in that everybody plays one of them, because it's just amazing. Rounding off from the collector side, we're getting a Full Art Bianca and a Full Art Cheron to go with our Full Art N, which is good, but not necessarily needed. We're also getting a shiny Terrakion, which, as well as looking cool, is going to keep Terrakion in the format for at least another season after he gets rotated. And now we get to the best card in the entire set. Mamoswine. He's coming back, ladies and gentlemen. He's a stage 2, he's got 150 HP, he's water, he's weak to metal, he's got the usual hideous retreat cost. But we're getting Mamoswine back. Now he's actually got a couple of very interesting attacks. For a water and a double colourless, he does 50, and if you can hit a heads on a coin flip, you add 20 damage and paralysis to that. 75% of paralysis if you've got Victini out. And for 2 water, 2 colourless, you've got one of those attacks which keeps doing damage until you flip tails. For every heads, 90 damage. If you've got an EX facing you down without an Eviolite, 2 heads, 1 hit KO. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a moderately playable Mamoswine. Now this podcast is overrunning slightly, so the forum gossip is going to have to wait till another day, I'm afraid. We are pretty much going to finish it there. I know I said I was going to talk about Entei and Kling Clang decks this week, but obviously with a new set being leaked in Japan, I had to change it around a little bit. If you've got any questions for me, or you'd like to give me a bit of feedback or tell me things that I should be talking about, please give me an email at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or find me on Twitter at TheWassy. Or if you're listening to this on Pokemon Dan's YouTube channel, just leave a comment below. Thank you to everyone that has helped me get the word out about this podcast, Pokemon Dan and Adam Capriola from Six Prizes especially. The help is massively appreciated, and if you want to keep giving me the help, I would keep appreciating it massively. Now I did try and get a little bit of a phone-in going, whereby you sent me details of your most memorable games and I shared them. Nobody's told me about any yet. So if you've got a particularly memorable game, please send us an email, ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or find me on Twitter at TheWassy, or just comment if you're listening to this on YouTube. Don't forget to check back in next Wednesday for another episode. I've been Ross Gilbert, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.